The flavor of that morning still haunts my palate. Flat oats and watery, reconstituted milk. It was the identical, tasteless ration I had choked down every single day for 17 years at St. Catherine's. Yet there was a heaviness to that particular March Tuesday. A finality that made the bland food sit like lead in my stomach. This wasn't just breakfast. It was the end of an era. My 18th birthday was looming just 3 days out, and the state's statutes were rigid. Once you hit legal adulthood, the safety net vanishes. There were no grace periods or sympathetic waivers. I was already packed, having sorted my meager life into order the previous evening. My entire existence had been condensed into a battered canvas duffel. Inside lay 2 pairs of denim, a handful of shirts, and a parka with a zipper that refused to close. Tucked safely beneath the fabric was a small timber box holding the solitary relic of my history. A sun-bleached snapshot of the woman I assumed gave me life. The story went that she abandoned me on the orphanage steps when I was mere 6 months old. No heartbreaking letter, no reasons given, just an infant and a woven carrier. The only clue she left behind was that solitary image folded into my swaddling clothes. I had spent nearly 2 decades memorizing the grain of that photo, hunting for familiar shapes in her fuzzy silhouette, desperate to understand what kind of desperation makes a mother walk away forever. After the trays were cleared, the director summoned me. Mrs. Harove was a woman of iron discipline. Her silver hair scraped back so severely it pulled at the corners of her eyes. Despite her stony exterior, I had witnessed fleeting moments where her humanity peeked through the cracks. Brief instants where the bureaucrat vanished and a caretaker appeared. She extended a manila envelope containing $200 in cash, a directory of overnight refuges, and brochures for employment agencies. Her face held a look of professional pity. Warm enough to be polite, but distant enough to protect her own heart. This was a ritual she performed constantly, discharging unwanted children into a society that had no use for them. "You have a good head on your shoulders, Caleb," she stated, employing that hollow optimism grown-ups use when they want to offer hope but foresee struggle. "Stay out of trouble, apply yourself, and you will find your path." I simply dipped my chin in silent acknowledgement. Rising from the chair, I headed for the exit, steeling myself to face the biting Chicago wind with nothing but empty ambition and $200 in my pocket. The first sanctuary on her list closed its intake at 5 o'clock. If I moved with purpose, I might secure a mattress before they reached capacity. My fingers grazed the brass handle when a noise stopped me. Mrs. Harove cleared her throat. "Hold on," she murmured, her tone shifting enough to compel me to look back. The authority was gone, replaced by a rare tremor of hesitation. I have one more thing for you." She unlocked a lower drawer and retrieved an aged, yellowing file. My name scrawled across the tab in ink that had long since lost its vibrancy. The cardboard corners were frayed and velvety, evidence that it had been sitting in storage for a long time. "This came in the mail 2 years back," she confessed, pushing the document across the mahogany surface. "We attempted to verify the sender, but hit dead ends. Since you were a ward of the state, the bureaucracy swallowed it whole. I admit it slipped my mind entirely until I was finalizing your discharge files yesterday afternoon." My heart began to hammer against my ribs as I flipped the cover open. The contents were a mix of dense legal stationery and a personal letter on lined school paper. The script was wavering and spiderwebbed, the mark of a hand failing under the weight of age or infirmity. It looked like a struggle just to keep the pen steady. The salutation bore my name. "My dear Caleb," it started. "If these words are finding you, it means my time has passed, and you have grown into a man. My name is Walter Thornton. I am your grandfather. Your mother, Jolene, was my little girl." The air left my lungs in a rush. Tears welled up, smearing the ink into blue Rorschach tests, and I had to squeeze my eyes shut to reset my vision. The letter mentioned a property, a farm that was now my birthright, though it came with a warning of an $8,000 debt. Panic flared briefly. How could I service a loan? But I forced the anxiety down to focus on the trembling script. "She lost her way, son. She made choices that shattered us. But please know this. You were never considered a mistake. I searched for you, but by the time I located the orphanage, my health had failed me. I couldn't travel, and the legal system moved slower than winter's sap. A grandfather, flesh and blood. A living, breathing human being who not only knew I was alive, but had actively sought me out. I am leaving you the only legacy I have. It might not look like a fortune to city folk, but the soil is rich and the work is dignified. Thorntons have worked this ground since 1947. It belongs to you now. The location is listed below. Go to the town of Ashford. Find an attorney named Caldwell. He holds the deed and the keys. The paper rattled loudly in my gripping hands, but I pushed through the emotion to finish the page. I pray you make the journey, Caleb. I want you to walk the land your ancestors tended. More than that, I need you to know that you were never discarded. You were simply misplaced. With all my love, Grandfather Walter. I reread the signature 3 times, my chest heaving. A homestead, a lineage, a connection I assumed was impossible. For my entire life, I believed I was a solitary island. I was convinced I was debris, just another case number in a cold machine designed to warehouse unwanted youth. But I was wrong. Someone had loved me from afar. Someone had fought to reach me. Someone had bequeathed me their entire world. Across the desk, Mrs. Harrove watched me crumble, her face softening into something that finally looked like grace. Her professional composure fractured, and I caught a glimpse of genuine shock. She was just as blindsided as I was. The site is roughly 2 hours south, she whispered. It was a tiny community named Ashford, deep in the rural heart of Illinois. The homestead has remained vacant for nearly 2 years following his death. The authorities attempted to reach you through our agency, but red tape slowed everything down. Her voice faded away, her expression softening into something resembling regret. According to the law, the title is yours. It has been for quite some time. My gaze locked onto the location scrawled at the bottom of the page. Ashford, Illinois, Route 12, the Thornton Estate. 63 acres of earth that suddenly belonged to me. A residence bearing my surname, with my lineage rooted in its dirt. It was dreamlike, as if a gateway appeared in a barrier I thought was impenetrable. I wasn't heading back to the pavement. I wasn't returning to that shelter with its paper-thin bedding and the hopeless looks on everyone's faces. I was moving toward a sanctuary that was mine, a spot where a stranger had actually wished for my return. I walked out of St. Catherine's later that day, gripping the file tight, a bus pass costing half of my $200 tucked in my pocket. The coach reeked of chemical cleaners and cracked plastic, carrying a blend of exhausted commuters and folks who appeared to be fleeing their pasts. Pressing against the glass, I observed the Chicago towers fade away, replaced by level fields and the occasional village as we motored southward. The March clouds hung low and slate-colored, promising a downpour that refused to break. Endless stretches of open country reached for the edge of the world, offering more breathing room than I had ever witnessed. My thoughts spun with uncertainties. I didn't even know what a working homestead looked like in person. How would I manage it? I was a creature of pavement and sirens. My only brush with the outdoors was the tiny lawn behind St. Catherine's, where we were granted 30 minutes of fresh air daily. A voice inside urged me to liquidate the property and grab whatever cash I could find. I could begin again elsewhere, anonymous, with enough funds to keep me afloat until I stabilized. Yet a dormant instinct, awakened by that notice, yearned to witness it. I needed to walk the ground my ancestors had occupied for generations. I needed to grasp my origins and discover the person I was meant to be. When the transport arrived in Ashford 2 hours later, twilight was falling, bathing the world in a golden amber glow. It was a hamlet, really. A single drag featuring a handful of stores, a blinking eatery sign, the mail center, and a fuel stop. Banners waved from verandas, and planters under the sills overflowed with the first flowers of the season. It resembled a set from a classic film, unhurried and peaceful. A community where secrets were rare and strangers stand. You considering a sale? I haven't got a clue about agriculture. No one starts as an expert. Then I will study. I have to attempt it. out like a sore thumb. It was the antithesis of my reality. I queried the driver regarding the location of Caldwell's legal firm. He gestured down the road. "Third structure on your left, kid. Crimson brickwork. Hard to overlook. The old man stays until 6 or thereabouts." Offering my thanks, I shouldered my bag and descended into an atmosphere completely alien to me. The air held a distinct quality here. Pure, grounded, vibrant. Absent were the smog and the stench of decaying refuse. Only the aroma of turf and dirt remained, mingled with an elusive sweetness. I trekked along the pavement, my shoes dragging on cement that appeared untouched since the 1950s. A handful of residents noted my presence. A matriarch with a broom, a laborer in dungarees tossing sacks into a truck bed. No greetings were exchanged, only the guarded observation that tight-knit communities keep for newcomers. The firm sat precisely where the transit operator had indicated. A modest masonry structure featuring Caldwell and Associates stenciled on the glass, the gold leaf weathered down to a pale lemon hue. I shoved the entrance open, triggering a jingle above. A silver-haired gentleman, peering through metal frames, raised his head from his work. His visage bore the marks of time and endless documentation. Heavy creases near the eyes, yet held a gentle demeanor. "Is there something I can do for you?" he inquired. I gulped, displaying the file. "I am Caleb Thornton. I have come regarding the estate." Mr. Caldwell rose deliberately, his gaze expanding with a blend of astonishment and alleviation. Removing his spectacles, he wiped them on his vest, looking at me like an apparition. "Caleb Thornton," he echoed, weighing the syllables. "I'll be damned. We nearly stopped expecting you." He signaled for me to take the battered seat opposite him. The hide was fissured from the years, yet yielding, softened by generations of clients. "Walter was a decent sort," Caldwell murmured, sinking deeper into his worn leather seat. "He was a quiet man, kept his own counsel, but his word was oak solid. Folks around here held him in high regard. Once the illness took hold, he spent those final months sorting his affairs so he wouldn't face any hurdles." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, staring at my hands. None of this registered as real. It felt like I was eavesdropping on a stranger's biography. The attorney rummaged through a metal cabinet before retrieving a heavy manila folder bearing the family name. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. Titles, assessment forms, and a transfer deed stamped with official ink. "You're looking at 63 acres, he stated flatly. "But I'll be straight with you. The house has seen better days. No one has lived there since Walter died 2 years back. There's a barn and some sheds out back, maybe some machinery, though I can't vouch for whether they still run. Taxes are paid up through December, and there's a modest fund intended to keep the lights and water on for another 6 months." Caldwell stopped talking, his face hardening slightly. "Once that runs dry, it's all on you. But listen, there's a complication." A knot formed in my gut. I knew it was too good to be true. Charity always has a price tag. Walter borrowed money about 3 years back. $18,000 from a local guy named Randall Vance. Vance buys up land all over the county. He's an investor. Your granddad was desperate. He needed cash for treatments his insurance refused to cover. He hasn't made a payment in 14 months. $18,000. The figure knocked the wind out of me. I didn't even have $100 to my name. To me, $18,000 was as impossible as 18 million. "So, what happens now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Vance can demand full payment." He held off for a while, waiting to see if any kin would claim the estate. But he's done waiting. Caldwell leaned in, lowering his voice. "You have roughly 4 months before he files for foreclosure. That gives you until late July. If the money isn't there by then..." He let the sentence hang in the air. 4 months, 120 days to manifest $18,000, or watch my inheritance evaporate. Everything established since 1947 would be gone. My instinct was to run, to thank Mr. Caldwell and bolt. I could catch a bus back to Chicago, hit the shelter, and survive on the streets like I always had, alone and owning nothing. Yet I couldn't move. Something about the old man's letter, or maybe the way the lawyer looked at me, held me in place. "Is it possible to visit the place?" I asked quietly. "The farm?" Caldwell's face softened into a genuine smile. "I was hoping you'd say that. Grab your coat. I'll take you." It's a 15-minute ride. We hopped into his battered truck, the manual stick shift grinding loudly as he navigated the gears. Daylight was fading as we left the city limits behind. We rolled onto a slender country road, surrounded by pastures that seemed to go on forever. The lawyer spoke over the engine noise, telling tales of Walter's service in Korea and how he bought the land with his army pay. He spoke of how Walter raised my mom solo after cancer took my grandmother, Margaret, way too soon. He prioritized that land above all else, Caldwell noted. Always said the roof comes first. Lose the roof, you lose it all. "Is it salvageable?" I asked. "It can be," he replied, "but it demands sweat and patience." "I've got nothing but time," I whispered. Caldwell nodded, describing 50 years of weathering storms and economic crashes without bending. "Jolene had a spark," the old man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She was sharp and stunning, but she got tangled up with a dangerous crowd in her 20s, bad habits and worse men." Watching her decline destroyed Walter. I looked away, focusing on the wooden posts blurring past the window. "Then she vanished, taking you with her. Walter burned through his savings on private eyes trying to track you down. When he finally found out you were in the system, the red tape was too thick, and his health was already failing." The reality of his words landed on me, heavy and suffocating. He hadn't abandoned me. He had fought for me. All those years I spent in the group home feeling unwanted, he was out there looking. The truck crunched onto a gravel path. A weathered sign stood guard, the words, "Thornton Farm," barely legible after decades of fighting the elements. The pickup jolted over the uneven gravel, carrying us deep under a sprawling archway of bare oaks that blotted out the twilight. Then the timberline broke, and the homestead revealed itself. It anchored the land, a 2-story main house wearing a coat of white paint that was flaking away like dry skin in the winter. The front veranda leaned heavy to the left, while the windows stared back with fractured or boarded-up eyes. Up top, the roof was tired, its shingle line jagged and gap-toothed against the horizon. Yet beneath the rot, the bones were good. It sat heavy on a limestone foundation that hadn't shifted an inch. This place had stared down 70 years of prairie gales and simply refused to kneel. A massive barn loomed out back, its once vibrant red bleached by the sun into a soft, powdery pink. The roof was a patchwork of repairs, and one sliding door dangled precariously, unwilling to close. Past the outbuildings, the acreage ran wild with tall grass and goldenrod, rippling in the dusk wind like an ocean tide. Caldwell killed the engine and dropped a heavy brass ring into my palm, giving my hand a brief, grounding squeeze. "She's all yours, kid," he murmured. "Do what you need to do. But if you stick around, well, folks round here know how to lend a hand. Your granddad carried a lot of people through hard times. That kind of debt doesn't expire." He drove off, leaving me alone with the crickets and the creeping night, just staring up at the silhouette. Mine. The roof that sheltered my grandfather. The floorboards my mother learned to walk on. The secrets were locked in there somewhere. The reason she walked away and never looked back. Where did she go? Did I ever cross her mind? Did she ever stand on this porch and think about coming home? I took the stairs one by one, shifting my weight tentatively to make sure the rot hadn't eaten through the timber. It protested, but it held. The front entrance was secured, but the second key on Caldwell's ring slid home with a satisfying metallic slide. The tumbler turned and the door groaned open, revealing a hallway swallowed in shadow and struck by the final, dying beams of the sun. Suspended dust hung in the shafts of light, silent and thick. I crossed the threshold into the parlor, where draped furniture stood like silent statues in a tomb. Frames hung askew on the plaster, the glass filmed over with grease. I wiped one clean and felt my heart hammer against my ribs. A snapshot of a girl, hardly more than a child herself, clutching an infant. She looks back at me with my own deep brown eyes, holding a bundle swaddled in pale blue wool. That was her, And this was the last safe harbor she knew before the world broke her. I drifted through the silence. The kitchen held an ancient range cooker crusted in years of neglect and a lonely table overlooking the overgrown pasture. 3 chambers awaited at the top of the landing. The master suite belonged to the old man. Military corners on the bed sheets and a wardrobe smelling of cedar and plaid flannel. The second room still wore fading floral wallpaper, likely hers. The third was a cramped space, choked with cardboard cartons. I peeled back the flaps of the nearest box to find dog-eared storybooks, a cracked leather mitt, and a teddy bear loved down to its stitching, an archive of a childhood I never had, preserved by a man waiting for a reunion that never came. I sank to the floorboards amidst the debris of lost time, and the dam finally broke. It wasn't grief. It was the crushing weight of relief. The sudden, visceral knowledge that I had a place in this world. That night I curled up on the parlor sofa, pulling my denim coat tight against the chill. The timber settled and popped in the cooling air. A chorus that should have been eerie but just felt like company. Fatigue hit me like a physical blow, dragging me into the heaviest slumber I'd known in an eternity. I resurfaced to blinding morning light cutting through the glass and a choir of unknown songbirds announcing the day. For a split second, the confusion lingered, until the reality of the inheritance washed over me. I was sprawled on his sofa, under his roof, anchored to earth that bore my name. My neck was stiff as a board, but it didn't matter. The rest felt better than good. Even with the grime and the rot, the walls held a quiet promise of safety. It felt like the tumblers of my life had finally clicked into place. I hauled myself up and wandered toward the sink. The pipes shuddered and groaned when I twisted the tap, bleeding out rusty sludge before the stream finally ran clear and cold. I splashed icy water against my skin, the shock snapping my eyes wide open. My stomach gave a hollow rumble, a reminder that I hadn't seen a meal since the bus terminal yesterday. I had less than $100 to my name, and no blueprint for how I was going to keep myself fed or funded. But survival was a problem for later. For now, the urge to see what I'd inherited took over. I stepped out into the sharp morning chill, taking in the world with a sober gaze. Under the sun, the homestead looked more promising in some ways. You can't heal it all in a day. Feels like I have to. One field, one season. Then we begin right here. Yet it also looked far more broken than it had in the dark. At least the bones of the buildings were strong. The fields rolled out in waves of green and gold toward the skyline, but a heavy blanket of abandonment lay over it all, feeling almost aggressive in its silence. Thickets of weeds strangled the walking paths. Paint flaked off the walls like dead skin. Rust had chewed through anything made of iron. The mountain of work staring me down felt insurmountable. Perhaps impossible for a lone man with zero experience and empty pockets. I made for the barn first, its giant double doors sagging crookedly on their frames. I hauled on the handle, and the wood screamed against the dirt floor as I forced it wide. The interior was a vast, shadowy cathedral. Beams of light cut through holes in the ceiling, illuminating dust motes that danced like floating gold. Abandoned machinery littered the ground. A tractor sat on rim-flattened rubber, its engine block buried under layers of grease. An old plow was seized up, rusted into a solid piece of metal. Hooks on the walls held tools so pitted with decay they were practically fossils. It felt like walking into a museum of a lost time. But against the back wall, a workbench shrouded in canvas caught my eye. It looked intentional, protected. I crossed the floor and whipped the cover off, choking slightly on the plume of old dust that rose up. Underneath, it was a different story. These tools were pristine, oiled, and respected. Spanners and drivers lined up like soldiers. Pliers and hammers hung ready on their pegs. Sitting dead center was a small timber box with brass fittings. It was simple craftsmanship, but sturdy. I cracked it open to find a trove of paper, receipts and logs penned in my grandfather's steady hand, alongside a stack of photos. Most were snapshots of him toiling on the buddy. Property, leaning against that same tractor, bringing in the harvest, mending fences. A quiet history caught on film. One picture, however, stopped me cold. It was him, arm draped around the shoulders of a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, with cascading dark hair and a grin that seemed to supply the light for the entire image. Her palm was cupped over her stomach, resting on the undeniable swell of carrying a child. On the reverse, written in tremulous ink, were the words, "Jolene, 6 months along, best day of my life." I stood there lost in the image. This was her, my mother, radiant and expecting me. Before the world broke her, she had this moment. There was a season when she knew joy. If he called this his best day, how did it all unravel? What tragedy struck so hard that she left me at an orphanage door and faded into the ether without a word? Slipping the photo into my jeans, I dug deeper. Resting at the bottom of the chest, beneath the documents, was a leather-bound notebook. The cover was polished soft from years of use, the pages within turning the color of tea. I opened it gently, recognizing my grandfather's script crowding every inch of paper. It was a log of the earth. Planting dates, crop yields, storm tracks, and repair lists. But tucked between the data were fragments of the man himself, quiet confessions and worries that showed the human heart behind the labor. An entry from 3 years back grabbed me. News came today about Jolene's boy, located in Chicago. He's been there all along, lost in the foster machine after she walked away, fighting to bring him here. But the courts demand paper trails I can't provide and cash I don't possess. God willing, I'll break through. Then an entry from 2 years ago, nearing his end. Body is failing. Too weak to battle now. The medicine drains me dry. Lawyers say the case could drag on for years. But I'm not quitting. I'm willing it all to him. The soil, the house, whatever coins are left once Vance takes his share. If I can't shelter Caleb while I breathe, I'll give him a sanctuary when I'm gone. A man needs a foundation, needs to know his source. I couldn't save Jolene, but maybe I can give her son a fighting chance. I shut the book, pressing it hard against my ribs. He knew. He fought for me. And even when his time ran out, he made sure I wouldn't be left with nothing. He made sure I'd know the truth. I let the morning consume me, walking the perimeter, checking where the posts had rotted and the wire had snapped. I inspected the sheds. The coop was a hollow shell, silent and vacant for seasons, standing beside a shed where the roof had surrendered to gravity. Nearby sat a greenhouse, a skeletal frame with most of its glazing smashed out, looking like a jagged mouth. The mountain of work ahead was enough to crush a man's spirit. I was green as grass, flat broke, and operating without a blueprint beyond just drawing breath for another 24 hours. Yet I possessed something entirely new to me, a patch of earth with my name on it, a lineage I could touch. And buried deep in my gut, a spark of genuine purpose that finally felt substantial. The sun was high overhead when the rumble of an engine broke the stillness of the driveway. That crunch of rubber on gravel was so alien here that my muscles locked up, anticipating a threat. I rounded the corner to find an ancient blue pickup idling by the steps. A figure pushing 60 stepped down from the cab. He was built like a silo, with features etched deep by decades of exposure to the elements. Clad in worn leather boots and faded denim, he rolled the sleeves of his flannel shirts to show forearms corded with working muscle. "I reckon you're Caleb," he hollered, offering a hand as big as a shovel blade as he closed the distance. His shake was solid iron, born of labor rather than aggression. "Name's Earl Whitmore. I run the acreage abutting yours. Farmed alongside your granddad for 32 years. It's an honor to meet his kin. Caldwell rang me up last night, mentioned Walter's boy had finally come home." He scanned me then, his gaze heavy with assessment but devoid of any criticism. "Reckoned you might be needing a hand getting your bearings." He nodded toward the truck bed, piled high with cardboard boxes and brown sacks. "Hauled over some staples, a bit of provender, and some gear to get you started. My missus, Doy, sent along a hot casserole and a loaf still warm from the oven. She says eating gas station trash is no way to christen a new home. That simple, unearned grace floored me more than a punch to the gut. Here was a total stranger stepping up just because my grandfather had been his friend. Honestly, I'm at a loss. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Earl swatted away my thanks like it was a gnat. Your granddad pulled my fat out of the fire more times than I care to tally. Back in the drought of 1998, I was near ruin. Walter hauled water to my stock every single day for 2 solid months. Refused every penny I offered. This ain't charity, son. It's just balancing the books. That's the code out here. We worked in tandem to empty the bed, hauling the load into the farmhouse kitchen. Earl narrated the inventory as we went. Tins of vegetables, fresh dairy, coffee grounds, and a battered toolbox filled with the essentials for quick fixes. When the last box was down, Earl stood amidst the clutter, eyeing the room with an unreadable look. She's rough around the edges, he admitted, but the bones are good. Walter didn't build temporary things. He turned, locking eyes with me. You fixing to put down roots, or are you looking to flip the deed and move on? It was the very question haunting my own thoughts. Truth be told, I was still wrestling with the answer. The instinct to flee was strong. To liquidate the assets, grab the cash, and vanish back into the anonymous hum of the city. That was my safe zone. But standing in that kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of my lineage, with the scent of yeast and roasted beans grounding me, the choice solidified in my chest, heavy and real. I think I'm staying, I murmured. I couldn't grow a weed in a vacant lot, but I want to make this work. The cracks in Earl's leathered face deepened into a grin. That's all a man can do. Try, and then try again tomorrow. He fished a card from his vest pocket. Tell you what, I'll swing by at first light, and we'll map out a strategy. We'll resurrect this place, one nail at a time. He took his leave then, swearing to be back with the sunrise. From the porch, I tracked his dust cloud down the lane, feeling a thaw in my chest I hadn't felt since I was a boy. In the weeks that followed, Earl made good on his promise, and then some. He was there every dawn, armed with black coffee and a thermos of Doy's stew, treating me like an apprentice he'd been waiting on for years. We tackled the fundamentals first, gauging the rot in the barn rafters, clearing the choked spillways to stave off the rains. He taught me the subtle art of sorting through the rusted heaps of iron left behind in the sheds. We had to determine what was just scrap metal, and what could be brought back to life with a little oil and patience. It was a lesson in discerning what was truly salvageable, not just with the tools, but with everything. His wife, Doy, appeared twice a week, bringing meals and a brand of motherly warmth that felt startlingly real. She bypassed the polite walls I'd built around myself, treating me like bloodkin from the jump. She asked about my past and actually held space for the answers, as if my story carried weight. Through their introduction, the community opened its doors. I met Old Man Perkins down at the supply depot. The moment he realized I was of Walter Thornton's line, he knocked the price down, honoring a memory I was only just beginning to understand. Early on, the local preacher, Father Mitchell, knocked on my door. Not to preach, but just to say the town had my back if things got rough. Then I met Maggie Sutter, a girl hardly older than myself at 19. She ran her folks' apple groves a couple of miles down the highway. One crisp April afternoon, she appeared on my doorstep, lugging a basket of reds and offering to run a soil analysis for me. She wasn't like the city girls I grew up with. She carried a quiet confidence, the kind born from real work and dirty hands, not arrogance. Her parents had come over from Korea, back when she was a toddler, so she knew firsthand the grit it takes to build a life from scratch. Stop trying to figure out the whole puzzle right now, she said, as we trudged through the dirt, bagging soil samples. Just tackle one problem, then the next. That simple wisdom saved me more times than I can count. 3 weeks into my stay, I was sweating over some rotted porch planks when something caught my eye. One slat looked too fresh, untouched by the weather, and it thumped with a hollow echo when I put my weight on it. Curious, I dropped to my knees and gently worked the wood loose with a pry bar. Hidden in the dark recess below was a heavy metal strongbox, the sort people use to safeguard their life's secrets. My grip was shaky as I hauled it up, discovering the key taped underneath, swaddled in a scrap of paper. Unwrapping it revealed a note penned in the familiar jagged scrawl of my grandfather. Caleb, finding this means you stuck around long enough to care about fixing this old place. That speaks volumes about who you are. There is $3,000 inside, my rainy day fund. It won't make you rich, but it'll buy seed and fuel to survive your first harvest. Use it to figure out if this life fits you. I also left a letter from your mother. I found it after she disappeared. I'm not sure if it will heal you or hurt you, but the truth belongs to you. Whatever path you choose, just know I'm proud you gave it a shot. Love, Granddad Walter. I turned the key with trembling fingers to find neat piles of 20s and 50s, just as he promised. But my gaze locked instantly on the envelope resting beside the cash. It bore my grandfather's name on the front. The script was nothing like his. It was soft, feminine, with loops tilting gently to the right. I sat there on the steps, frozen, clutching that piece of paper, half tempted to rip it open right then and there, but the other half of me was paralyzed by fear of the words inside. Only when the sun dipped low did I summon the courage to slice it open, pulling out a sheet of spiral notebook paper with the fringe still attached. The page felt like fabric, softened by time and weakened at the folds from countless readings. "Dad," the letter started, "I know I lost the right to call you that a long time ago. Not after the damage I caused. Not after the theft, the deception, and the heartbreak." I had to look away, closing my eyes to steady my breathing. Gritting my teeth, I looked back at the page. "You did everything to save me, but I chose the addiction and the liars I called friends over you. There is no undoing that now. I'm scribbling this in some nameless motel room in Indiana. I couldn't even tell you the city. My mind is a fog, but I need to tell you one clear thing. I had a son, Dad. I named him Caleb, honoring your father. He is flawless, pure in every way I am not, which is why I have to let him go." I read those lines over and over, each pass cutting a little deeper into my soul. I am incapable of being the mother he deserves. I can't even save myself. I've been underwater for so long, I've forgotten how to breathe. If I hold on to him, I'll drag him down into the dark with me. I will ruin him, just like I ruined everything else. So I surrendered him to a safe haven, a place where he'll be cared for better than I ever could. You probably hate me for this, and you should. But please, if you ever track him down, tell him I loved him. Tell him his mother was weak, but never let him think he wasn't wanted. He deserves the world. I don't know if I'll ever get sober, Dad. I don't know if I'll make it out of this life, but Caleb will. He has your resilience in his veins, so he has a fighting chance. I am so sorry for the pain, for breaking your heart, and for throwing away the life you and Mom built for me. I love you, Jolene, even if I was always terrible at showing it. I read those words 3 times before the page disappeared behind a wall of tears. They fell silently, smearing the ink my mother had put to paper 17 years ago. She had loved me. In her own fractured, desperate way, she had truly loved me. Leaving me wasn't an act of cruelty, and it wasn't because she didn't care. She did it because she was going under, and she couldn't bear to drag me down into the depths with her. She loved me enough to say goodbye. If you're still with me here, I need to take a second just to say thank you. Sharing this story means the world to me. The fact that you're listening says a lot about who you are. Before we go on, I'd really like to hear from you. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and let me know in the comments below. Have you ever found a note that completely rewrote your history? Or found out someone cared for you in ways you never understood at the time? I want to hear your story. We're building this community on the idea that nobody has to walk through the fire alone. Now, back to what happened. Right when I thought I was finally standing on solid ground, only to find the man who wanted to take it all standing on my porch. 2 days later, I was in the barn with Earl, trying to coax some life into the old tractor, when the sound of tires on gravel cut through the air. It wasn't the rattle of Earl's truck or Maggie's hatchback. This was a smooth, expensive purr. I wiped the grease from my hands onto a rag and stepped out into the daylight. A black Mercedes sedan sat in the driveway, looking like a spaceship that had crash-landed in the dirt. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with silver hair slicked back from a face that was handsome in a sharp, predatory sort of way. He was wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than my entire life's savings, paired with shoes so polished they had no business touching gravel. "Caleb Thornton?" he called out, walking toward me with a hand offered in greeting. His smile was just a movement of muscles. His eyes remained dead. "Randall Vance. I believe we have business." So this was him, the man holding the note on my grandfather's debt, the man who could end my life here with a signature. I took his hand only because not doing so felt petty. His grip was quick and hard, like he was touching something unsanitary. "I wanted to stop by personally," Vance said, scanning the farm with a look of polite disgust. "Welcome you to the neighborhood. See how you're getting on." "I'm getting on just fine." "Good. That's good." The reptile's smile returned. "I trust Caldwell briefed you on the outstanding balance? $18,000, 14 months overdue. It's not a small amount." "I know. I'm sure you do." He reached into his jacket pocket. "That is precisely why I'm here with a proposal. I think you'll find it very generous." He extended an envelope. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, a spreadsheet of clean, printed figures. It was an offer to buy the farm for $40,000. After clearing the debt, I'd walk away with $22,000 cash. "That's enough for a fresh start," Vance said, his voice slick. "Get yourself an apartment, enroll in some courses. Build a real life instead of breaking your back on 63 acres of dust that hasn't turned a dime in years." I stared at the paper. $22,000 was more money than I had ever seen in one place. It was a way out. No more panic over grocery bills. No more wondering if I'd make it through the winter. All I had to do was surrender. "The land is worth more than this," I said. A flicker of irritation crossed Vance's face. He hid it quickly, but I saw it. "On paper, maybe, but look at the reality. The repairs alone will run you tens of thousands. The machinery is rusted junk. Nobody has worked this soil properly in ages. You are 18 years old, you have zero experience and zero capital. What exactly is your plan here?" The silence stretched. I didn't have an answer, not one that sounded real, anyway. "Think it over," Vance said, his voice dropping to a tone that mimicked fatherly concern. "You have until the end of July before I'm legally obligated to foreclose. That gives you 4 months to prove you can turn a profit. 4 months to fail." He let the words hang there. "Or you take the deal. Pay the debt, walk away with the cash to actually build a future. It's up to you." He turned on his heel and headed back to the sedan. Before getting in, he glanced over his shoulder. "End of July, Mr. Thornton. I'll be waiting." As the car rolled away, Earl stepped out of the barn shadows. He had heard every word. His lined face was set hard, showing an emotion I rarely saw in him. Pure anger. "For a decade now, that vulture has been picking these hills clean," Earl murmured, his voice barely rising above the wind. "His method never changes. Finds a family on the brink, dangling credit like a lifeline when the banks won't touch him. Then he sits back, patient as a stone, just biding his time until illness strikes or the crops wither. The moment they stumble, he's there to snatch the deed for pennies on the dollar." I asked him once why the law didn't step in. "Because he walks the line," Earl replied. "Never breaks a statute, just bends them until they snap. Folks don't see the trap closing until the teeth are already in." Earl cleared his throat and spat into the dust. "Pulled the exact same stunt on the Henderson spread, 2 miles west, and the Morrison plot up on Route 7. Decent folks. Roots ran deep in this soil, going back 100 years. Now, ghosts." My eyes traced the lingering dust cloud where the luxury car had vanished. "So, what's the move?" I whispered. Earl's heavy hand settled on my shoulder, grounding me. "You dig your heels in. You resist with every ounce of grit you possess. And more importantly, you don't push away the hands reaching out to steady you." In the weeks that followed, I discovered that battle wasn't always about shouting. Mostly, it looked like sweat. Earl and I wrestled the old tractor into submission. a task consuming 2 entire weekends and eliciting a stream of profanity from him that would blush a sailor. When the starter finally caught and the machine roared a smoky hello, we just stood there, covered in grease, smiling like fool kids. Between the resurrected engine and the $3,000 in inheritance money, I finally had a fighting chance. Earl advised against overreaching. 10 acres of soybeans, he directed. Forgiving enough for a greenhorn. Maggie took charge of the science, walking me through soil samples and translating the chemistry of pH balances and nutrient loads into plain English I could actually use. Father Mitchell rallied the troops, bringing a truckload of parish volunteers to get the ground ready for seed. Strangers, mostly, giving up their precious Saturdays to help me drive the disc and harrow across the earth. They broke bread with me, swapped tall tales, and welcomed me as if I had been born on this land, rather than just arrived. On planting day, as twilight settled over the furrows, I lingered at the boundary line. Looking at the dark soil, I realized I wasn't just looking at agriculture. It was an act of profound belief, a wager that labor and patience, combined with the grace of the season, would eventually yield life. Vance, however, wasn't the type to walk away. The pressure returned, subtle at first. My fertilizer order mysteriously vanished from the feed store's queue, and the local branch denied a modest operating loan, ignoring the solid equity I held in the land. Then came the whispers. Word on the street was that I was quietly brokering a deal with developers. Just another urban tourist looking to flip the heritage for a quick buck and bolt. Complete fabrication, of course, but in a tight-knit village, a well-placed lie can rot a reputation faster than blight. Maggie connected the dots before I even realized there was a pattern. Vance has his fingers in half the pies on Main Street, she explained one evening, rocking gently on the front porch as the light faded. He might not be the name on the door, but he holds enough leverage to tighten the screws on anyone he targets. So, I'm stuck? I asked. No, she said. We flank him. My cousins in Springfield run a supply chain. They don't give a damn about our local fiefdoms. You'll pay a premium for shipping, but the goods will arrive. The town's quiet resistance surprised me. When the feed store shut me out, old Mr. Perkins down at the hardware depot began secretly carrying the agricultural supplies I required. When the bank closed its doors, Father Mitchell passed the plate a second time on Sunday, gathering enough funds to keep the farm's lights on. And to combat the gossip, Earl and Doy hit the pavement, visiting neighbors porch to porch to set the record straight about Vance's machinations. The words in my grandfather's diary began to resonate. His insistence that this dirt wasn't merely an asset, it was a covenant. A handshake across time between the ancestors who cleared it and the children who would one day inherit it. Come early June, the earth answered. Rows of vibrant green soybean shoots punctured the crust, reaching eagerly for the light. I patrolled those acres in the gray, pre-dawn light, inspecting leaves for bugs, testing the dampness of the soil, and yanking invasive weeds by hand. The labor left me bone-tired, yet I'd never felt more purposeful. And then, the sky turned against us. Late one July afternoon, I watched a bruise form on the horizon. A towering wall of obsidian clouds sweeping across the plains with malevolent intent. Earl had cautioned me about the volatility of an Illinois summer, how a tempest could materialize from thin air and erase a year's livelihood in the blink of an eye. There were no minutes left to batten down the hatches. I stood frozen as the heavens curdled into a sickly green and the atmosphere began to scream. The ice arrived before the rain. Stones the size of golf balls pummeled the earth, a relentless artillery barrage shredding the tender leaves and snapping stems like dry twigs. Then the gale struck. A physical blow that swept my legs out from under me, sending me crawling on hands and knees toward the sanctuary of the barn. I crouched in the gloom, listening to the violence outside, the timber groaning, the wind roaring like a freight train, and the deafening machine gun rattle of ice against the tin roof. When the silence finally returned, dread pinned me to the floor. I didn't want to see what was left, but I forced myself to stand and open the door. 70% of the harvest lay ruined. Stalks that had stood knee-high and vibrant only hours ago were now smashed flat, broken and beaten into the muck. The gale had torn a chunk off the barn roof, and the tractor, which I had foolishly left out in the open, was all but swallowed by debris. $3,000 vanished. Seasons of sweat equity erased. And the clock was still ticking. 25 days remained before July turned over. Vance rang that evening, his tone dripping with a counterfeit pity. "Heard you took a hit. Tough break. My offer is still on the table if you are ready to be reasonable." I didn't say a word, just cut the line. That night, I hit bottom. I sat there in the pitch-black kitchen, clutching the phone, staring at his number. A single tap, and the struggle ends. I could walk away with a pocket full of cash and not a worry in the world. No land to tie me down, no history to live up to. Perhaps it was better that way. What was I really fighting for? Just an 18-year-old kid with no parents, trying to rescue a homestead he hadn't even laid eyes on until 2 months back. It felt absurd, prideful, a silly fantasy that guys like me aren't meant to chase. I was ready to make the call when my gaze drifted to Granddad's diary. It lay right where I'd abandoned it earlier. Pages still spread to the passage I'd been reading. I lifted the book, finding the date again. The entry was from 1983, the year the rain never came. Corn is mostly dead. Figured we would be forced to auction it all off. Believed it was the end of the road for us. Then the neighbors showed up. Every soul in the county arrived with whatever they could spare. Seed, tools, hours of labor. None of them were rich, but together we had enough to survive. That moment taught me the true weight of this soil. It isn't merely earth and harvest. It is a covenant, a vow to stand by those who lift you up when you are too weak to stand alone, and to return that grace when their time comes. That is the essence of farming. That is the heart of a community. That is what it means to be family. I lowered the phone. The next day, Earl pulled up before the sun even crested the horizon. He wasn't alone. 6 other growers were with him. "We aren't letting Vance take this," he stated flatly. "Now get moving. There is work to be done." They worked alongside me to drag away the ruined plants, patch the hole in the barn, and coax the tractor back to life. Maggie arrived with news on a late-season wheat variety. If we could get the seed in before late August, we'd be harvesting by October. It wasn't a magic fix. The bushels would be fewer than the soy, and the margins razor-thin, but it offered a lifeline, however slender. Father Mitchell rallied another crew for a workday. The turnout was even larger this time. 20, 30, perhaps 40 souls spread out across the acres, turning the soil. A neighbor set up a grill, cooking hot dogs to feed the volunteers. Children darted through the fresh furrows, their laughter ringing out as they played tag. Watching them, these neighbors who owed me nothing, yet gave everything, I finally understood the lesson my grandfather had left for me. This was the feeling of having a place in the world. We got the wheat planted in late August, 30 acres of winter wheat, sown with loaned gear, gifted grain, and the sweat of strangers who had become my kin. July faded into memory. Vance had started his legal maneuvering, but the courts move at a glacial pace. We had a reprieve, narrow but sufficient. I pushed the legal threats to the back of my mind and threw myself into the labor, walking the rows daily, watching the sky, and whispering prayers to a God I barely knew, asking for rain but not a flood, sun but not a drought. Just enough grace for the grain to survive. September rolled in, and the daylight began to wane. Evenings turned crisp, and the fields started to fuzz with green, tiny spikes piercing the black earth, fragile yet stubborn. On one of those still September nights, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Opal Jennings, 82 years old, living in solitude in a cottage down the road. I'd spotted her in town now and then, but never exchanged a word. Earl told me she was a recluse, had been for ages. "Caleb Thornton?" Her voice trembled, frail as old paper, but it held a hidden strength. "I need you to visit me this evening, if you are able. There is a matter regarding your mother that you should hear." I drove over as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her place was compact and orderly, ringed by flower beds that were impeccably kept, defying the years of the hands that tended them. Mrs. Jennings, Opal to those who knew her, welcomed me at the threshold. She was a bird of a woman, barely 5 feet tall, white-haired, with knuckles swollen from arthritis, yet her gaze was piercing. "I appreciate you making the trip," she said, ushering me in. "Have a seat. I'll put the kettle on." The air inside was toasty and carried the scent of dried lavender. Photographs and trinkets claimed every inch of shelf space. It felt like a whole life distilled into a few tiny rooms. "I used to be a nurse." Mrs. Jennings placed a steaming mug on the table between us. "Spent 40 years nursing at County General," she murmured, "though I hung up my scrubs about a decade ago." She lowered herself into the armchair, moving with the deliberate caution of a woman well acquainted with her own aching joints. Couldn't just stop completely, though. Kept busy volunteering down at the free clinic. Did what little I could to remain useful. She hesitated, bracing herself to deliver the blow. "That is where our paths crossed, your mother and I." My breath hitched in my chest. "You actually knew Jolene?" "I knew her in her final days." Her tone was soft, yet she didn't look away. "She returned to Ashford 5 years back, Caleb. Came home searching for her dad." The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet. It had been a long time. She'd spent years surviving on the streets, drifting between rehab centers and nowhere. By then, the addiction had stripped her of nearly everything. But she found a spark of resolve. She was determined to sober up, to fix what was broken. And Walter was the one she needed to see most. My mind went blank, words failing me. Tragically, by the time she arrived, your grandfather had already been admitted. Stage 4 cancer. He spent most of his time drifting in the space between waking and sleeping. He rarely knew who was in the room. Your mom held vigil by his bedside for 3 days, but he never realized she had come home. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her fingers possessing a firmness that belied her age. With no cash for a room, she was living out of her vehicle. She came to the clinic desperate for support to stay sober. The surname rang a bell. I put the pieces together. She stopped for a moment. "I did my best for her, Caleb. Tried arranging shelter, a treatment plan, but she wouldn't have it. She was convinced she was beyond saving, that she'd ruined every good thing she ever touched." How did it end? Tears welled in Mrs. Jennings' eyes. She lost the battle 3 weeks after arriving, overdosed in a rundown room out on Route 20 at the Starlight Inn. 2 days passed before she was discovered. The news struck me with the force of a physical assault. She hadn't simply vanished into the void. She had returned. She had attempted to reconnect, attempted to heal. Yet she passed away in solitude, just a few miles from her childhood home. "Why was I kept in the dark?" I choked out. "Why the silence? Because you were a stranger to us. Your grandfather followed Jolene a month later. He ran out of time to share your existence. The paperwork that would have linked you to this land was never filed." As for Jolene, Mrs. Jennings shook her head slowly. "You were on her mind in those final hours. She spoke of a son back in Chicago, but never gave us a name. To her, you were simply my boy, her beautiful boy." The old woman rose stiffly and crossed the room to a bookshelf. Retrieving a small carton, she carried it back to the table. She entrusted this to me, told me to hold on to it, just in case you ever came looking. I've been guarding it for 5 years. My fingers shook as I lifted the lid. Resting inside was my grandmother's wedding band, a plain circlet of gold thinned by decades of wear. Beside it lay a snapshot of my mother as a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, perched on her father's knee on that very porch. Their faces were lit with laughter. Underneath was an envelope bearing my name. I couldn't bring myself to break the seal then and there, not in front of Mrs. Jennings. Despite her kindness, I needed solitude. I expressed my gratitude, vowed to return, and drove back to the farm in a fog. For a long while I sat alone on the darkened porch. Above, the sky was a tapestry of stars, far more than the city lights ever allowed, strewn like diamonds on velvet. Eventually, I unfolded the paper. "My beautiful boy," the handwriting began. "If these words are finding you, it means you made it here. You found your way home. I never doubted you would." I'm scribbling this while sitting in my car in the hospital lot, using the street lamps to see. He is fading, and in a different way, so am I. This addiction has its claws in deep. It never truly lets you go, even when you think you're free. But there is something you must hear. Walking away from you was the most agonizing thing I have ever done. Worse than the sickness of withdrawal, worse than any physical suffering I've endured. You have been in my thoughts every single day for 17 years. I constantly imagined your face, your voice, the man you were growing into. I dreamed of tracking you down, finally getting sober, and walking up to your foster home to prove I was worthy of being your mom. But I never made it happen. I was too frail, too frightened, too damaged. I pray you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for my sake, but because resentment is a heavy burden, and you have carried enough weight already. Know this, your grandfather loved you. He spent years scouring the earth for you, heartbroken that he failed. Yet he never lost faith. That was simply who he was. And Caleb, I love you too. I realize I surrendered the right to say those words the day I walked away, but they remain the truth regardless. I have loved you since the very first flutter of life within me. You have been loved every second since. If you ever make your way back to Ashford, put something in the ground, something alive, something that endures. And as you watch it stretch toward the light, know that it is me. Recognize it as my love, finally breaking through to show itself. Find joy, Caleb. Find courage. Become everything I was too broken to be. It was signed, your mother, Jolene. I read those lines until they were etched into my memory. Then I set out for the graveyard. It was well past midnight, but time didn't matter. I had to find her. I had to see where she had been laid to rest. The burial ground was modest, just a few acres tucked behind the Methodist chapel. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over row after row of stone, until it landed on them. My grandparents, Walter and Margaret Thornton, resting shoulder to shoulder beneath an ancient maple, united in death just as they were in life. Beside them sat a simple marker, devoid of names or dates, merely a county number assigned to a body no one claimed. My mother lay in an anonymous grave, a mere 3 feet from the father who had dedicated his life to bringing her home. I sank into the dew-soaked grass beside that unmarked earth, and something deep within my chest shattered. It wasn't weeping, at least not initially. It was a raw, unfamiliar sound, a wail rising from a place far more primal than simple sorrow. She had died in solitude, just an arm's reach from the man who never stopped searching for her. She had made it back. She had tried. And the tragedy was that not a soul knew she was there. The tears came later, but they felt different this time. They weren't born of self-pity or regret. They were tears of release, of finally understanding, of letting go of the 17-year-old narrative I'd clung to and embracing a reality that was messier, yet far more human. I held my vigil at the graveside until the sun broke the horizon. Then I returned to the farmhouse and got to work. But I need to take a breath here. What Caleb managed, forgiving his mother despite the wreckage, is a monumental feat of the human spirit. It brings a question to mind. Have you ever nursed a grudge for years, perhaps decades, only to finally set it down? Have you ever stood over a headstone and whispered to things you couldn't say when they were still breathing? If this part of the journey resonates with you, please consider subscribing and sharing your story below. Who did you manage to forgive? What was the price of holding on to that bitterness? And how did the liberation feel when you let it go? Your experience might be the lifeline someone else needs right now. But let's return to the final showdown. This was the fight that would decide if Caleb kept his grandfather's legacy or lost it all. The following 3 weeks tested me like nothing else. Vance's legal machinery ground into motion. His attorneys buried us in paperwork, filing motion after motion to accelerate the timeline and force a ruling before I could harvest a single grain of wheat. I had 20 days to answer his ultimatum or lose by default. Caldwell managed the filings, but we both knew the odds were stacked heavily against us. Vance had the capital, the legal team, and the clout. I had a struggling crop and a town that was rooting for the underdog. And then the breakthrough happened. I was combing through Granddad's diary again, hunting for a loophole, when I spotted an entry I'd previously overlooked. It dated back 3 years, right around the time the loan originated. Vance stopped by today with his proposal. $18,000 for the medical costs, 20% interest. The farm as collateral. I had no other option, but my gut told me not to trust him. So when he suggested swapping 10 acres of the north pasture to knock $8,000 off the principal, I agreed. But I demanded a separate written record. Predators like Vance assume you're too exhausted or sick to check the details. But I checked, and I kept the proof. My heart started pounding. I frantically flipped through the rest of the book. There, wedged deep in the binding and folded into a tiny square, was the handwritten contract. It explicitly confirmed that 10 acres of the north field were deeded to Vance, dropping the debt by $8,000. I recognized the parcel immediately. It was the exact strip Vance had been leasing out as a construction lot for the last 2 years. 10 acres he was profiting from, all while suing us for the full $18,000 debt. I dialed Caldwell without wasting a second. The proceedings took place in the Ashford Courthouse, a grand old structure where autumn sunlight spilled across polished marble floors. Vance occupied the plaintiff's bench, flanked by his high-priced legal team, radiating arrogance. Huddled beside Caldwell at the defense table, I gripped the worn leather of Granddad's diary like an anchor in a storm. Judge Ruth Whitaker presided. A local fixture in her 60s, she knew every inch of Ashford and had watched Vance's predatory games for years, previously lacking the ammunition to halt him. Caldwell submitted the scrawled note into evidence, detailing the terms and backing them with ledgers, proving Vance had pocketed rent on those 10 acres, money never deducted from the loan balance. The opposition scrambled, shouting objections. They called the paper a fake, argued Walter had lost his mind when he signed, and dismissed the narrative as fiction. But the judge remained unmoved. "Mr. Vance," she began, her tone dropping to absolute zero. "I have witnessed your maneuvers in this county for a decade. I have watched you prey on families during their weakest moments. I have longed to intervene, yet you always skirted the very edge of legality." She lifted the agreement. "This, however, alters the landscape. This is proof of deceit, intentional, cold-blooded fraud targeting a dying man and his kin." The gavel fell in my defense. She wiped the debt clean and commanded Vance to refund 2 years of lease income he had no authority to collect. $12,000, less the principal owed, meant I walked away with cash in hand. I left the courthouse lighter than air, solvent, free, and finally the true owner of the farm. Maggie stood guard on the stairs outside. Without a word, she launched herself at me, squeezing with all her might. Tremors racked her body, relief radiating from her skin. "You made it happen," she murmured. "You actually pulled it off." "We did," I corrected. "It took all of us." She stepped back, fixing me with those piercing eyes that had read my soul since day one. "Mom and Dad expect you at the table for Thanksgiving." She raised a hand. "And don't you dare talk about being a burden. It is not up for debate. You are kin now, Caleb. Deal with it." I liked it more than I could ever articulate. A fortnight later, harvest arrived, bringing what seemed like the entire town to my aid. The crop hadn't just endured, it had flourished. Late summer showers and gentle autumn heat had conspired to perfection, goldening the grain without burning it. As the machinery carved golden paths through those 30 acres, I watched from the boundary, vision blurring. I wasn't weeping from grief, but from a strange, new mix of pride, thanks, and the deep peace of nurturing life. We pulled 42 bushels per acre. Earl called it stellar for a novice on first-year soil. Maggie declared it a small wonder. I saw it simply as evidence, validation that I belonged here, confirmation that Granddad's trust wasn't in vain. Once the grain went to market and creditors were satisfied, I held enough funds to survive the cold months and buy seed for the thaw. Hardly a windfall, but a solid footing. Then, 3 days prior to the holiday, a letter arrived from State Services. They were launching a new initiative, an agricultural mentorship aiming to guide foster kids transitioning out of care. Word of my journey and Ashford's support had reached them, and they inquired if I might join the effort. I accepted immediately. The week leading up to Thanksgiving, I returned to the graveyard. The permanent marker I commissioned had finally been placed that morning, after a 3-week wait. I lingered there, tracing the inscription. Jolene Elizabeth Thornton, 1985 to 2019. Cherished daughter, devoted mother. A woman who loved enough to let go and brave enough to attempt a return. Crouching low, I laid a modest bunch of wildflowers against the granite, blooms harvested from our own soil at dawn. Life sprung from the earth Granddad tended. The same earth she roamed as a child. Land that now bore my name. I forgive you, I whispered to the wind, for going away. I get it now, and I need you to know I'm safe. I found a home, a tribe, and I found who I am. I'm sowing seeds, Mom. Living things that endure. Whenever they stretch for the light, I'll see you. 1 year on, celebrating my 19th, I stood on the porch, surveying my domain. The farmhouse gleamed in fresh white and blue, restored to the palette Granddad originally picked. The barn was watertight, fences stood straight, and the machinery hummed with readiness. Green shoots of winter wheat were already pushing up through the soil out in the pasture. This season was different, though. I had dedicated the north 20 acres to soybeans and the south 15 to corn. Earl was always preaching about not betting the whole farm on a single harvest, a strategy he fancied calling diversification. We had officially launched the Youth Guidance Initiative the previous summer, bringing 8 teenagers from Chicago group homes down for 2 weeks. They got their hands dirty in the earth, looked after the new flock of chickens, and discovered the pride of making something real. More importantly, they realized they weren't invisible, that somewhere in the world, people were actually looking out for them. People who knew exactly how heavy it feels to grow up thinking you don't belong to anyone. Tonight, Earl and Doy were stopping by for supper. Maggie was handling the sweets with a treat from her folks' orchard, and Father Mitchell said he'd swing by with updates on the parish edition. I finally had a tribe of my own. It wasn't the lineage I inherited by blood, but the circle I had crafted, and the circle that, in turn, had crafted me. I retrieved the snapshot I always carried, the image of my mother, young and expecting, smiling right here on my grandfather's veranda. I studied her expression, then shifted my gaze to the wooden planks beneath my boots. Same boards, same landscape, 70 years of memories. And I had finally woven myself into the tapestry. My mind drifted back to that terrified 18-year-old stepping off the bus in Ashford with 0 expectations, a single duffel, and $200 to his name. That boy had been adrift, disconnected, unseen. Yet he discovered meaning in this dirt, in the daily grind, and in the neighbors who embraced a drifter just because they respected his grandfather. He put down roots. I tucked the picture back into my wallet. Stepping off the porch, I headed toward the crops, because that is simply what you do once you find where you belong. You put in the work, you create, and you remain. I appreciate you sticking with me through this whole saga. If this narrative resonated with you, I would be honored to have you subscribe and join our growing circle. We talk about hope here, about getting second chances, and discovering a sense of home where you least expect it. Leave a comment down below. Have you ever unearthed a detail from your history that completely shifted your perspective on tomorrow? Have you found kinship with strangers? Or managed to forgive the unforgivable? Whatever your journey looks like, I want to read about it. This space is founded on our collective stories and the bravery to press on when the road gets foggy. So please hit that subscribe button. Pass this video along to anyone who might need a little encouragement today. And never forget, you are not as isolated as you feel. Sometimes the tribe you are looking for is already standing there, just waiting for you to come home. Catch you in the next one. Keep the faith. Continue building and growing. This isn't merely a tale about a guy holding on to a farm. It is an exploration of reclaiming oneself. Starting as a kid who felt cast aside and like a perpetual outsider, Our main character faces the world with empty hands and a slow burning dread. The dread of being unnecessary, the terror of having no sanctuary. Yet the empty fields, the crumbling house, and those old journals reveal a vital lesson. We aren't defined by our origins, but by what we decide to nurture and protect. The mother figure here doesn't represent callous rejection, but rather the heartbreaking reality of flawed affection. She loved her child enough to release him, aware that she lacked the strength to keep him safe. Forgiveness here doesn't wipe the slate clean, it frees up the future. When he chooses to forgive, he doesn't delete the hurt, he turns it into bedrock. That soil was more than real estate. It was a covenant, a pledge to a grandfather who toiled until the end, and to a mother who failed but never stopped caring. Above all, a vow to himself. No more fleeing, no more trading his soul for an easier path. Through sweat, connection, and grit, he understood that true family isn't about DNA, it's about the people who refuse to leave when the storm hits. This story serves as a reminder that salvation rarely comes from wealth or fortune, but from having a sanctuary to retreat to, and a purpose deep enough too.